From the point of view of psychology, what is interesting about the mind is what it does, what functions it has. One of the important functions of the human mind is self-regulation. It has been thought, at least in the past, that other animals behave instinctively, whereas humans are able to regulate themselves rationally. A lot of the time, that is not what we do. This video is about the coping mechanisms we can use consciously, as well as the defense mechanisms we might be using because we haven't learned better ways to deal with our problems. I'll start with the problematic and potentially bad ways to deal with our issues, and then I will explain the different ways of coping that are likely to lead to better outcomes. This video is part of my series Introduction to Psychology. See the link in the description for more information. My name is Jouni Vilkka, and this is my channel, TFF Teacher from Finland. Subscribe to my channel and click the thumbs up button. We humans have complicated inner lives. Besides experiencing external pressures from our physical and especially social environment, we also manage to create internal pressures for ourselves from our own internal lives. We, for example, adopt goals and expectations for ourselves that we might struggle to live up to. Our experiences may force us to change our understanding of ourselves, or to appeal to some external factor to explain what happened, why we failed to act according to our explicitly stated values, for example. According to the psychodynamic school of psychology, people try to maintain a consistent and meaningful internal state in order to uphold the wholeness of their experience of self. This means having to resolve conflicts between different contradictory contents of their minds. We are sometimes faced with problems that threaten the consistency of our psyche, causing us to experience unpleasant emotions, or things that cause us severe stress. Such things are a threat to our mental well-being. They force us to regulate our responses. For example, we would like to think of ourselves as skilled or knowledgeable at something, but this proficiency is challenged. Or we might be accused of behaving in an unethical manner, which we don't want to accept. Or we might have a highly stressful job that constantly causes us severe anxiety. Our best option in a situation like this is to use conscious coping mechanisms to deal with the problem. People who don't know how to do that may try to use alcohol or drugs in an attempt to self-medicate or suppress the painful emotion or thought pattern, which is likely to just lead to more problems. I've been there, done that. I hope you don't have to, and I hope the following will help you avoid that. I will now briefly explain various psychological defenses or defense mechanisms we might subconsciously apply. After that, I will explain how you could use coping skills or methods instead, as they would likely yield better results. Those skills are divided into 4 groups: problem-focused, emotion-focused, meaning-focused, and antecedent-focused methods. At the very end, I will provide a short summary of the whole video. Defenses are at least partially unconscious or preconscious forms of regulation. The latter means something that can be brought to conscious awareness fairly easily, but typically remains below the proverbial surface otherwise. If something is completely within the unconscious, also called subconscious, it is not accessible to conscious thought for the time being. Defenses are symptoms of an unbalanced mind, and they can be harmful for your long-term health and relationships. Very importantly, many of them are irrational forms of thought and behavior, which any thinking person would wish to avoid. It is possible to learn how to cope better without resorting to them, but more about that later. First, I will list some defense mechanisms to give you an idea of the scope and variety they include. 1. Repression. Refusing to face the facts, one's own emotions or desires, or not believing that an event happened. 2. Suppression. Refusing to pay attention to the difficult emotion or thought for the time being in order to be able to prepare for the experience. 3. Rationalization. Explaining things away, finding reasons for one's behavior or beliefs after the fact, for example, when unable to admit the real motives behind one's own actions. Intellectualization. Distancing from one's emotions by overanalyzing things. Could even include analyzing one's own physical, emotional responses, like crying, from an intellectual point of view without accepting the emotion itself. 5. Compensation. Trying to make up for one's perceived failure in one thing by overcompensating in another, or undercompensating in order to avoid embarrassment due to failure. A smoker could spend a lot of time working out. A student could skip class to avoid being called on by the teacher, as they fear their ignorance would be revealed. 6. Regression. Behaving less maturely than one actually is, regressing even to the level of a small child. This is an attempt to reduce anxiety. A driver can throw a tantrum because there is a cyclist in front of them on the road, or there's a traffic jam. 7. Projection. Seeing one's own emotions in the other, because experiencing the emotion is unacceptable for some reason. For example, one can blame someone else for being jealous, although they are actually the one who's jealous, because one considers jealousy to be unacceptable. 8. Reaction formation. Acting in the opposite way from what one unconsciously wants to, or believing the opposite of what would seem true because the truth causes too much anxiety. 9. Sublimation. Redirecting one's energy from unwanted desires or emotions into socially acceptable pursuits like art, sport, or other activity that results in indirect gratification for the original desires. Perhaps you really hate someone, so you play an aggressive sport to find a way to express your emotions in an acceptable manner. One of the good ways to deal with one's issues, obviously. 10. Introjection or identification. Identifying with another person, such as one's own mother or a pop star, in order to lessen one's fears or to build one's own identity. A child can talk to themselves as if being their own parent, telling themselves that there is nothing to fear, for example. 11. Humor. Accepting the distress but taking it on and reducing its impact with the help of humor, perhaps by making self-deprecating jokes about it. One of the best and most mature defense mechanisms. 12. Passive-aggressive behavior. Instead of directly and openly expressing your hostility, you do so indirectly in ways that are not obvious. The so-called silent treatment may be the most well-known form of passive-aggressive behavior. Slamming doors or similar behavior is also probably common. 13. Isolation of affect. Compartmentalizing an emotion from the experience or thought causing it. This enables the person to utilize adaptive behaviors to deal with the cause and to discuss it in a detached manner. This leaves the emotion unprocessed, which may become a problem if not addressed. 14. Displacement. Instead of dealing with a threatening thing, directing one's impulses toward a target safer for oneself. An employee at the company is angry at their boss but lashes out at the co-workers because confronting the boss is too dangerous, career-wise. 15. Splitting. Experiences are divided into all good and all bad, disallowing any gray area. And the latter are usually projected at someone else. 16. Dissociation. Modifying one's character temporarily so that one doesn't have to deal with the distress caused by the situation. 17. Schizoid fantasy. Escaping the situation into a fantasy. These are just some defenses, in no particular order. Psychologists have different ways of defining and listing them, but these are just to give you some idea of the sort of processes and behaviors they can include. This is just an introduction to psychology, so I will return to them in more detail during a different course. Next, I will explain the generally more useful ways of dealing with difficult emotions, stress, and disturbing thoughts, using coping skills or methods. I will describe 4 types of coping skills: problem-focused, emotion-focused, meaning-focused, and antecedent-focused, in that order, starting with problem-focused coping skills. Problem-focused coping is about finding and solving the actual problem causing the stress or unpleasant emotions. This can be fast and effective as well as empowering as you manage to take control of your life. When used alone, problem-focused coping methods can lead to ignoring your emotions, which could have detrimental effects, as it might be necessary to also process the emotions caused by the situation. Suggesting problem-focused methods to others might seem insensitive, and they might even feel superficial when practicing them yourself, because they simply focus on the issue. I personally prefer focusing on getting rid of the problem in order to minimize the time under stress, but personal preferences tend to vary. I will now list some useful coping methods. My go-to method is making to-do lists. For example, when studying at university, I always made sure I knew what I needed to do for each course or to get the proper qualifications, to become a teacher, for example. Having a list enables you to see your progress as you can cross things off your list. It is especially recommended if the things you do are otherwise very abstract and leave you nothing concrete to experience. As part of making the to-do lists, you need to pay attention to deadlines. If something has to be done by a certain date, it may be useful to create your own deadline that is earlier than the given date. That way, you will allocate your time and other resources to meet your own deadline, but even if you miscalculate, you still haven't actually failed and may be able to meet the real deadline. This reduces stress for me. Does it work for you? Let me know in the comments below. As part of making lists, but also independently of that method, analyzing your problem by literally breaking it into its constituent parts is very useful. Big projects can seem daunting when you haven't even started working on them, and you might find yourself putting it off, which of course will then lead to problems with deadlines. But if you focus on the details, you can find bits of the problem small enough to start with. They can even be artificial if you can't find suitable bits naturally. For example, if you have to read a difficult textbook and all the chapters are too long, you can decide to read even just a single page or paragraph at a time, if that makes it easier to start reading. If cleaning your whole house is too much work and the thought of having to do that already drains you, then How about you just start with cleaning a table or something like that? It may be useful to do the easiest thing on your list first. That way you can get started. You can get a lot of things off your list by doing the easy things, but I would caution that this approach will mean that your remaining tasks will be progressively more difficult. To avoid this, you should perhaps try to alternate between easy or quick and difficult or time-consuming tasks. Scheduling may be useful to help you both find enough time for your tasks as well as reduce the amount of worrying over them. The point is to allocate a specific time for the task in your calendar so that you don't need to worry about the thing before the chosen time. Once the time comes, focus on it for the allocated time and reschedule if needed. Remember to take breaks and rest effectively. Cognitive work is taxing and can only be done effectively for short periods at a time. The Pomodoro technique or something similar can be used to maximize effectiveness. In addition to that, proper sleep is necessary. You shouldn't let yourself talk negatively to yourself, thinking negative thoughts that question your abilities. Force yourself to say positive things, or at least stop the negative thoughts, and force yourself to focus on the issue. You could perhaps remind yourself of situations that you did manage to survive despite what they seemed at the time. Perhaps the stress you experienced at the time even helped you to push forward and succeed. If you feel overwhelmed, pause and calm down, and then analyze the situation to find the one thing you need to do next. Remember that you can probably break it into smaller tasks if necessary. Usually you can, of course, also ask for help. In my opinion, people tend to be eager to help. Being able to help allows them to feel important, needed. Feeling connected to others and helping them increases one's happiness. It's what human life is all about. Sometimes problem-focused coping skills are not enough, or the nature of the problem can be such that it simply cannot be just solved. In that situation, it may be useful to use emotion-focused coping methods to alleviate the stress or other discomfort caused by the stressor. Emotion-focused coping is best used in combination with problem-focused coping if possible. That way the stress and related emotions are addressed, but the problem at their root is also dealt with, so the symptoms will actually be removed. Learning emotion-focused coping is also useful in that it improves your emotional regulation in general. You will probably find yourself emotionally affected at times, but with improved skill in their regulation, those emotions will have less influence on your choices and cognitive functioning. The effects of harmful stress will also be reduced, meaning that the amount of stress hormones harmful to your health in your bloodstream will be reduced. You will also experience fewer negative emotions, making your life happier. There are essentially three types of emotion regulation: cognitive, social, and physical. The first is to use our cognitive abilities to reduce the strength of the emotion, distancing ourselves from the source of stress or discomfort. Journaling is obviously a cognitive type of emotion-focused coping. By writing down what's on your mind, you may be able to distance yourself from your emotions and the events of your life. This healthy distance can provide a better perspective on things and even reveal possible solutions, even though the immediate goal is merely to reduce the impact of the stress on your psyche. If it suits you, some form of art could also be used to express your emotions and simultaneously process them so that they might have less of an effect on you. This might require at least some basic skill in an art, of course. Music is strongly connected to emotions and can be used in two opposite ways in coping. One way is to listen to the kind of music that fits your mood or emotions, thus probably enhancing them. This could then allow you to process those feelings faster. There is a danger though. In my experience, listening to music that is depressing or otherwise deals with negative emotions, doom and black metal, over a long period of time may influence your mood negatively. Thus, I recommend the second way more. Choose uplifting or peaceful music, like energetic heavy metal or the new age music of guitar. That hopefully changes your mood for the better. Some forms of meditation, like mindfulness, may be useful in managing stress and improving your focus on the present, instead of the stressful or annoying, downright harmful things and thoughts that would otherwise plague your mind. The second type of emotion-focused coping is relying on your social resources, such as relatives, friends, or other safety net. Social connections can be used to help solve the problem or to deal with the consequences. Just talking to someone can alleviate the effects of stress. The third type of emotion-focused coping is using physical means to relieve the stress caused by the problem. For example, jogging or eating can be used to regulate stress and emotions in different ways. Just moving in almost any way can have a positive effect on your mood, especially if you can do so in a park or any woodland. Exercising regularly will also improve your health, which will additionally improve your resilience to stress. Eating and drinking can be a source of pleasure, but it can also cause new problems if it leads to unhealthy habits. Indulging occasionally can boost your mood with positive emotions, but frequent indulgence comes with diminishing returns, as well as negative effects in the form of increased body fat, other health issues, as well as regret, possible addiction, and a loss of a sense of control. Use with care. Some simple techniques of meditation are actually more physical than mental. Merely taking a couple of deep breaths with slow exhales can reduce anxiety. Another technique would be to focus on your breathing for a while, allowing thoughts to come, get acknowledged, and let go, and always returning to focus on breathing. Nothing more. The choice of the type of emotion regulation depends on culture, which might restrict the options available for you. Clearly, not all forms of emotion-focused coping are equally beneficial, and some are actually maladaptive, causing additional harm. Besides the ones I just mentioned, these include at least avoidance, denial, and toxic positivity. Besides emotion-focused coping, there is another way of coping that can be used when the situation is out of one's own control, called meaning-focused coping. This type of coping attributes a specific meaning to the event or situation that makes it more bearable. For example, one can attribute a religious significance to what one is going through in order to be able to endure the ordeal. It is not necessary for the person to believe any particular religious tenets for this sort of religious coping method, as one can merely think that the universe is pointing them the right way. For example, a person is diagnosed with a type 2 diabetes and then thinks that the universe is telling them to change their lifestyle. But meaning-focused coping doesn't always have to be religious in the above sense. It is about re-evaluating the situation one finds oneself in and giving it a new meaning. In other words, it is about looking for the silver lining in the dark cloud, to use that old expression. The form of meaning-focused coping most fitting to that description is called benefit finding. It is about looking for whatever good might come from the current bad situation, such as improving one's character, learning new skills or traits like patience, rearranging one's priorities, and so on. This may be the most used form of meaning-focused coping, at least outside the religious forms. A very similar form of meaning-focused coping is benefit reminding, which is simply about reminding yourself of the benefits one has previously found in trying circumstances and renewing one's focus on them. If you remember how you realized what really mattered, you can now focus on that again, ignoring the meaningless and irrelevant things cluttering your life. Reordering your priorities is an important form of this coping skill. You should sometimes consider your values and how or whether your way of life is aligned with them. This may become especially pressing in some circumstances. You may then want to focus on your real priorities and even change your goals. You can even benefit from looking at the meaning of your everyday routines in the light of your values and goals, reminding yourself of the connection between those actions and the deeper meaning behind them. This is useful in case you are struggling with some issues like feelings of insignificance, because it can make you feel good about the things you are doing, thus regaining some sense of purpose and strength to continue the daily struggle. For example, I teach and make videos in the hope that I manage to reach at least some people and have a positive effect on them. This way, perhaps they will in turn influence others around them positively as well, spreading wisdom, kindness, and critical thinking. Just teaching in order to make a living would not be enough for me. I need to think I'm actually making a difference on how people think and behave. James Gross has described what he calls antecedent-focused emotion regulation. The previous types of coping methods he calls response-focused strategies, because they are utilized at the time or after the stressful or unpleasant event or experience has occurred. And so the skills are used to modulate responses to it. For example, if you are afraid of going to the dentist, you are already experiencing the fear, and so those earlier coping skills are used to deal with that experience. The antecedent-focused regulation, as I understand it, focuses on what emotions the future situation will elicit and seeks to change that favorably. Antecedent-focused emotion regulation is a bit like problem-focused coping in how it is used to approach the problem, but also like emotion-focused coping in that it does seek to deal with unpleasant emotions more than the problem causing them. The idea is that often we can anticipate the situations we will be facing and the emotions those situations will cause in us. This begins with situation selection, which enables us to choose to even avoid the whole situation, which of course might lead to a different problematic situation. Once we have chosen the situation we will face, we can also use situation modification to change the situation in a way that makes it less unpleasant. If you're about to try doing stand-up comedy for the first time, maybe bringing some friends to cheer for you in the audience might be a good idea, for example. The next step, when we are already experiencing the stressful situation, whether anticipated or not, is attention deployment. We can choose from several strategies. Withdraw our attention from the stressful thing, distract ourselves by redirecting our attention to irrelevant things or our own thoughts, or concentrate our attention on the problem itself and confront it. You may also be able to rethink the situation, causing a cognitive change. By framing the situation differently, you can give it a different meaning that will help you deal with it. If your problem is a scary psychology exam, for example, it makes sense to anticipate it, deal with the stress by preparing for the exam well in advance, and focus during the exam on the task at hand, but as an opportunity to learn instead of as a trial where you are personally being evaluated. I have now listed some defense mechanisms you may have unconsciously learned to use. Some of them might be of some use, such as humor and sublimation, but most of them seem quite harmful. I then proceeded to explain 4 types of coping skills: problem-focused, emotion-focused, meaning-focused, and antecedent-focused methods. All of them can be used, but some may come more easily for you than others. Problem-focused coping is best, if possible, to apply, and it is best used in conjunction with the antecedent-focused method. The rest of the methods are useful in cases where the stressor or difficult emotion cannot be avoided, so you have to find a way to alleviate the psychological harm it causes. I hope this has been somewhat useful. This video is part of my series on the introduction to psychology. So if you haven't seen the earlier episodes, I suggest you check out the playlist or my website. The link is in the description below. That's all from me this time. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.